Hey, I'm excited. I'm sitting down with Kiki Knight. Kiki, hello. How are you?
Hi, Lance.
Thanks for joining us today. Kiki is a leader here at Bethel Church, and she specifically leads in what we call the breakthrough class. So she's specifically taking time and exercising leadership in the space of our church for those who are navigating any kind of disability, kids on the autism spectrum, families in general. So we're going to talk specifically about autism because we're highlighting that in this next month. We're going to take some time on autism awareness. And we have been discovering that this is not something that is just in the corner of culture, but families all over the planet are navigating the realities of autism, what it means, how to raise children with autism. And I don't really hear many people talking about it. So this feels like a really cool subject to crack open. I'm thankful that we're talking to somebody that knows something about this. Kiki, talk about you. Why are we interviewing you when it comes to autism awareness?
All right. Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to kind of get the word out there about kind of the work that we're doing. I am the lead special needs pastor in the children's ministry. So most of my work is with children and their families. I don't work as much with adults, although that need is out there.
Okay.
We have two different models that we use. We have an inclusion model where we include kids up to kindergarten. They're in our regular classrooms. Most parents prefer that. But when you get into first grade and up, the differences and the sensory issues, and sometimes it's just easier to be in a more sensory sensitive environment. And that's what we call our breakthrough class. Probably half or not, if not more than half of the kids who come into my class are on the autism spectrum.
Okay.
So, and that varies widely from nonverbal to very articulate kids.
Okay. And so you said you call your class a sensory sensitive environment?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's good. And so those that are on the spectrum, you just mentioned briefly, like talk about some of what that can look like for families, children who are on the spectrum. What are they actually navigating? Because it's a different world, right?
Yeah, that's a big question. And one of the problems is that it's so different. Like if you have a child that's high functioning, it isn't actually sometimes easier because you have you still have a child who's impacted by maybe being overstimulated by neon lights or the tags on their shirt or the food that they eat or just too much noise and chaos. They still may be impacted by that, but they don't look autistic enough for others to kind of say, oh, I'm sure this is a special needs child and we'll make allowances. And I think one of the things that parents endure is judgment. I think shame and judgment is a huge thing, that it's a factor because we all have this social norm, right? That children should behave, their parents should be able to control their behavior, right? And so when we see someone who's not being able to manage their child, they're breaking this social norm that we have, this expectation. And we don't really want to be seen with people who are breaking social norms. If there are people out there doing drugs, we don't want to be with them. If there are people out there being, sexually immoral, we don't want to be seen with them. And if we're over there with parents whose children are out of control, we don't want to be seen with them. The glitch here comes because Jesus was the guy that just walked around breaking all the social norms and hanging out with all the people who broke the social norms, right? So we have this tension that we live in, when you start to read the gospel in light of these families, you're like, actually, these are kind of some of Jesus's favorite people. But that's not, we don't always function that way.
Yeah. Yeah, so we're putting the highlight on Kiki because we want to begin this month talking. And someone's trying to call me. Someone was trying to call me. That's interesting. So we got interrupted. My phone's connected to my computer. There you go. we want to talk to somebody in the church because we're going to start like, okay, what's the church doing? Is the church doing anything? How is the church called to be responsive in this space? Again, within the landscape of autism, how prevalent is this in culture? Like, are there any sort of stats? How many families do you know of in our environment that are kind of impacted by autism? Like, is it pretty common?
Well, I think the latest statistic I've seen is 1 in 85 children born in the world today. That's very broad, but 1 in 85 winds up being identified as on the autism spectrum. So
Okay.
that's actually a very high number.
Yeah.
But not all of those are equally impacted. You do have
Sure.
people that are nonverbal, you can't communicate well, and then you have people who are very high functioning. And so it's hard to say that all of those would need a specialized classroom.
Yeah.
I think the statistic I like to tell people about Shasta County, just about special needs in general, I think we have a mandate as the church. Our mandate is to go into all the world and make disciples. It just didn't say to go into the able-bodied world and make disciples, right? So we have about 25,000 kids, according to Shasta County Office of Education, in Shasta County who receive special ed services through the public school system. That's 25,000 kids who aren't thriving in public school. If they're not thriving in public school without an IEP, if they're not getting special services, they're probably not thriving in your children's ministry.
Yeah.
They might be coming or not coming, but they're not getting much out of it, and they're not being reached, and they're not learning what an amazing and precious gift they are. They're not coming away with the message that they're amazing. They're coming away with the message that I don't fit.
Wow.
Right? That's not the message we want to give.
Wow.
If you give those 25, let's cut that number in half just to be generous and say 12,000 of those are kind of moderate to severe and not just a speech impediment, right? Give those kids a sibling and a couple of parents, and you have 50,000 people in Shasta County who are probably unchurched or underchurched. That's a mission field in our backyard.
Yeah.
We don't have to go to South Africa. It's right here, and they're not being reached.
Yeah, I love that you're drawing that emphasis. And again, what is the church doing about this? So in our local context, describe what has grown, what you guys have started. Again, I would assume we don't feel like this is the answer to everything, but there's some resources that we're developing. What does that look like? And I'm hoping, as we share that information, maybe these become examples for other communities to potentially do likewise, or
Yeah, and I think there's something stirring, and lots more churches are starting something. And and what I tell people is, you don't have to do everything. You don't have to invest thousands of dollars in a specialized classroom, unless you're Joel Osteen, and then you can. They have a fantastic program, but we don't all have that kind of funding. So, but everybody can do something. You can create some kind of capacity within your church. And it really just starts with, maybe you recruit a volunteer that, you have a family come who has a kid with autism, and you recruit a volunteer to be that guy's buddy. And he goes to Sunday school with them. And maybe when it gets loud and overstimulating, they go sit in the hallway for a hot minute until they reset and they can go back into class. What we're communicating in that, right, is that you're important and you belong, and there's a place for you in the church.
Yeah.
That's a win. I tell my staff all the time that, connection is the bridge that the gospel rides on, right?
Yeah.
And if we're not connecting, if they're just coming and surviving, and they get out and they go home and they're like, thank goodness I don't have to do that for another 6 days. We're not getting into their heart. We're not being able to, they're not experiencing the gospel.
Yeah.
So we have to just create capacity in ways that we can do that. We did for camp this year. So we had our camp for 9 to 12-year-olds. And what we had was, we called it the reset room. And so we just had a room that I sat in on this campus. And when kids got overstimulated by, because, campus is a lot of chaos and rah, 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 and games and races and things. When it got too much, those kids could just excuse themselves. They come sit in my room and build a few Legos and just calm down. And we had activities for them to do that they could engage with, what's Holy Spirit doing in this moment. And then when they were done, they just up and went back to class, back to the activities. So it didn't take us anything except a person sitting in a room with a few Legos.
Yeah.
So I think it
But
just
I love it.
creativity.
You're making space for a demographic that like maybe they don't fit in the normal space. And so, as you said earlier, it's like, are they experiencing the gospel when they come to us? I love it.
Yeah.
What else, as you guys have been building and designing this, what does that class look like in your kind of Sunday morning rhythm? So they come to a specific class. It's an environment that's set apart for those with some form of disability. What are you doing in that moment that becomes valuable for the kids you're serving? What have you guys seen about what's working? And yeah,
I'm probably biased, but it is my favorite classroom.
nice. I think that's how it should be. If you're leading something, it should be, you should be into it. Yeah.
The goal of our class, what I train all my staff in, is that our number one thing we're going to do is we're going to make sure that these kids have an opportunity to learn about and experience God in the best Bethel tradition. And so that's what we do. We just build opportunities for connection. So this Sunday, we had a staff that was working with a couple of kids on putting a puzzle together on the floor. Now, he's not just doing a puzzle with them. These are kids who are normally very chaotic, and they would just flip from one activity to another. And we pray into that day, and he carries peace. And they just sat there together on the floor doing this puzzle. And while you're doing that, you can have fantastic conversations about what's God doing. What are you dreaming about these days? What do you see? What do you believe that's happening around you? Fantastic windows to build connection. We had another kid that was building a tower that was actually almost 2.5 times his height. I mean, he just stood on chairs, which we don't normally let kids do, but in my class they do. That he's just building this. Every time I have a prophetic word for this kid, it's all about building. It's all about engineering. It's like, you are a builder, you're an engineer, you're going to change the world with your genius ideas. And I see them on Sundays. So he's over there building this tower. And then we've got another kid over here who's working with a couple of kids. We had some shaving cream that we just put on the table because we do all the fun things, and they're just experiencing that shaving cream. But the peace in that classroom and the exploration. And so of those kids, we had 4 of the 6 kids that were there had autism or on the spectrum. There was no fights, there's no bickering, it wasn't always that way. When we first get a kid, it takes us a couple of weeks to kind of get into the flow of it. But once they understand that that's what this class is about, and we're not going to force them into doing something that's not comfortable. Let me give you as a kind of a parenthetical. We had a kid that came, and his mom told us when he first came that he doesn't like transition, which is true. Lots of kids don't. So we have a little routine, we have playtime while all the parents are dropping kids off, and then we shift to our memory verse and our declarations, and we do all those things. And so when it was cleanup time, we have a little timer that we put up on the wall, and like, okay, it's cleanup time. This kid lost his mind. He threw himself down on the floor, tears, he's screaming, "Not clean up!" And he just, we're like, okay, he doesn't do transition well. That's okay. So my brilliant staff are like, well, let's not call it cleanup. Let's just say, let's get ready for the next activity. Problem solved. Next week, no meltdowns, because we're not saying cleanup, because my staff are, they just pick up the cues that say, oh,
Wow.
Buddy, it's time to get ready for snack. Boom. So I think the beauty of my class is that we look at these kids as individuals and we understand what makes them tick because we want to know and because we ask Jesus and because he gives us these keys to their heart and we build that connection. And then we have days like Sunday when there's just a room full of peace and kids learning memory verses and learning about how to be courageous um, and it's incredibly it's just gratifying. It's beautiful.
Oh, that sounds amazing. Talk about the element there with the families. Like, I'm assuming the families must look at that as a huge resource and they're
Yeah.
really thankful for what you guys are building. Talk about some of those dynamics. Like, how are the parents receiving these moments that you're creating for their kids?
I think, oh my gosh, the parent stories. Um, One of the things that is so rewarding to see is when parents come to pick up the kids and my staff look at the parents and say, thanks for letting us have your kid today. He was wonderful. You know, they don't get that everywhere they go. They don't get that at public school. Or like, you know, your child was brilliant today. They did this brilliant, amazing thing. And we see their brilliance because we create a world where that's where we want to see it.
Yeah.
We had the little boy, actually the little guy who didn't transition well. When his parents came, they moved here from Florida because of this class. They had heard about this class from a BSSM student and they moved here because of the class. The first day they dropped him off. The first day he bit a staff, but we got over that. But he made it through the whole class. And at the end of the day, his parents come to pick him up. Both parents have tears streaming down their face. Like, this is the first time in 6 years we've been able to go to church together. So their faith gets strengthened, their ability to have community is strengthened, so they're built up as parents. That gives them resources to then interact with their child. This is the same kid so over the COVID year, when we couldn't meet and I didn't want my kids to lose the connection and forget who we were and all that, I would take kids, this is just voluntary, but I have a couple of kayaks and we would take the kids on the river, so we'd take a kid and we took this little guy and we took his dad because his dad's good with kayaking. And so he was in the boat with his son and my daughter and I were in the other boat, just kind of, it's good to have a chase boat just in case something happens on the river. And so here's this little guy in the front of the kayak and he's standing on his head in the front of the kayak and he's singing as he's going down the river. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad his dad is in the boat with him because I don't know what I would do with that. But his dad is just so patient. And you just see being here in this environment, coming to Bethel and being in a place where they had some respite and they could see the beauty. I mean, they love their kid, but to have that time to see him in a different light, just so patient. Just, hey buddy, we don't do that in this canoe. Hey buddy, that's not how you handle a kayak. Hey buddy, can you sit down? Just so patient. But I think that's what we give them. We give them resilience because we see their child as amazing and we give them a chance to go get spiritually filled up.
Well, I think all people in all walks of life need to experience that dynamic of being surrounded and like we're not alone in the journey, right? And
so true.
So you guys are creating a space. It sounds like maybe that wasn't as common a few years ago, whatever the number is, like that we just kind of required those that were on the spectrum to kind of fit in to whatever else was going on. But you guys saw a need.
Yeah.
And you're able to like pivot and like, hey, we should probably create a resource here. What is it that you would tell to people that are not on this journey? They don't have children with autism. They themselves don't have autism. What is it that those with autism or families with those family members with autism, what are they facing? Like what's the journey like for them? Because I think we want to understand instead of judge. And you said that earlier, like sometimes these families just experience a lot of judgment because they're so different.
Right.
Yeah. Does that make sense? What is it that they're
Yeah.
facing so we can have a bigger understanding?
I think it's hard to put succinctly, but I think a lot of times when you have a child with a special need like autism, you you can't plan anything. Like if you wanted to do something fun with your kids, you might decide, on Saturday we're going to go to Turtle Bay and we're going to go to the museum and we're going to do all this fun stuff. You can do that and you can get your kids excited about that. But when you tell a child who has autism that that's what's going to happen, you don't know if on that Saturday you get to do that, because a million things could happen. You could have a meltdown. There could be, maybe Turtle Bay has for some reason it's closed, and then the drama of, but I need that. Like there's this compulsion in a child with autism. Quite often they get stuck in a cycle of, I have to have that thing. I have to have it. I have to go to Turtle Bay. You said we could be there at 10 o'clock. It's 10:01. Why aren't we there now? And that is very taxing. You think that's one event, but when that's all day, every day, it's incredibly frustrating for parents. And it's hard to parent a child that in many ways is not reciprocating that. You're 100% of the relationship, right? So there's no hugs and kisses, there's no snuggles, there's sometimes not even looking you in the eye, not responding to your love. And I don't know if you can imagine what it's like to hug somebody who doesn't hug you back and still feel good as a parent.
Yeah.
That's a huge challenge, to just rethink in your own mind, they love me in their own way and they are amazing people. Because sometimes it just feels like I do everything for them and they do nothing for me.
Yeah.
I just think that would be a huge challenge.
Yeah. So it sounds like because I don't know much about autism. So it sounds like a real rigidity, inability to be flexible, like overly stimulated, generalizing here, selfish, like pretty aware about themselves, but no one else. What are some other things that you've recognized about those that are on the spectrum?
My
And I
caveat,
realize that there's a range, like that's the word spectrum.
yeah, exactly. It is a range, and so some kids are do better than others. What we have found in our classroom is, as we create a more sensory sensitive environment, so we don't do loud chaotic things, as we create that, we see these kids have more resilience. But when they're in a Target with you, or heaven forbid Costco, or go to the movies, or in an environment where their needs are not being met at all, they lose their resilience, and so they'll melt down. I think that's the hardest thing for parents. A temper tantrum for a child is when they throw themselves down on the floor and eventually they're spent. Eventually they give up because they throw the temper tantrum and it didn't do any good, so then it's over. When a child has a meltdown, when a child with autism has a meltdown, it is an entirely different, it's a temper tantrum times 10, and they lack the ability, their hormonal system lacks the ability to calm down. And so the parent has to be the one that calms them down. And sometimes there's no, I had a kid have a meltdown in my class. And so we called the parents, and mom came over and she's just standing there with tears. They just like, I don't know what, there's nothing we can do. We just stayed here and we just isolate the other kids so things he's throwing don't hurt anybody. That kid, by the way, transitioned this year to go to our regular Destiny Kids class. So after 2 years in Breakthrough, he's now in a regular class. So we're seeing that kind of healing and restoration. And I wouldn't say that he doesn't have autism. I would just say that he has now social skills so he can manage himself.
That's great. Gosh, it sounds like our internet connection's tricky. So I don't know if there's anything you can do on your end, but you're starting to get frozen now and again.
Uh-oh.
What do you think about that breakthrough for that individual? Is that just the process of being nurtured, and over time learning some skills because of, you're receiving input, and oftentimes that rigidity, you don't receive input. It's just you're deflecting all the input. So these guys, it sounds like they're opening up to you and they're learning. And as a result of their learning, they're growing and able to function at higher levels. I mean, that's a really gross oversimplification, but what's your input on that?
I think that that's exactly what I see. And
Okay.
I think that healing comes in the presence. And I think
Yeah.
every Sunday that we meet, that's what we focus on. We bring the presence. We bring it because that's our job. We bring the presence, and they sit and soak in that for 2 hours. They can't help but get restored and healed. We have had kids who've had their doctors have taken their diagnosis away. We've had kids completely healed. And we've
Wow.
had other kids that are like this kid that transitioned. He still has autism, but his social skills are now such that he can interact in a regular classroom.
Yeah,
So
that's amazing. It also sounds like that you guys are operating in healing, like the word of knowledge, the word of wisdom. Like, let's not call it cleanup time. Let's say we're going to transition to another activity. Like, you guys are really in the room as leaders and following the Holy Spirit, again, all towards the end of like really nurturing these kids, not just getting through it, but like you're really pouring into them. And yeah, in those kinds of settings, it's crazy how people emerge. They, as you said earlier, they're experiencing the gospel, not just like, let's get through this time. So that's very inspiring. I love it.
yeah.
Anything you would say to those that maybe are like in different environments and they're hearing this conversation like, whoa, we haven't really paid attention to the autistic community among us. We want to start doing something. Anything you would say to them to maybe encourage them to get going? Or
I would say, yay. I mean, I just think you will see the most amazing things when you slow down enough to listen to what they say. And as you said, we're listening to God all the time, and he's giving us these breadcrumbs of, oh, do it this way. And let me give you an example. We had a young man who has autism, and he's got other issues, but we have this ukulele in our class. It was just a toy ukulele that we had in there. We have lots of things for kids to experience. And one day he came in and he took that ukulele and he sit in the corner and he tuned it by ear, like to what, I don't know. And he just started playing Ode to Joy. Like, he didn't practice it. He just played it. Like, he's an absolute musical savant. So now, of course, he's got musical instruments all over the place. And so when his mom came, we said, so has he had music lessons? She goes, he's never had a music lesson in his life. We wouldn't see that beautiful moment, right, if we weren't in that class, that where you think, here's a child who can barely make 2 sentences in a row. He just gives you 1 sentence at a time, and you have to figure out what he meant by that. And there he is playing this beautiful music out of this instrument that I don't even know how he tuned it. It was amazing. So if you want to see that kind of stuff, you have to slow down enough to want to be in that world. I tell people all the time that Jesus is close to the broken, that those kids, they're like a thin place. And when you can be in a place where you make it comfortable for them to be calm, you're calm, they're calm, you will see remarkable things. So you don't have to start with something expensive. As I said earlier, just start with something. Start with a buddy system. Start with a reset room. Start with just educating yourself on, the best education really is if you find somebody who has a child who has autism. Ask them, because what that child needs is different than what the next child with autism needs. You just they're going to teach you. You'll learn everything you need to know from the kids that you work with. Every new kid in our class is our teacher.
And so it sounds like each child that you guys are serving, like, it is a different, I mean, obviously all humans have a different story, but that reality of being on the spectrum, there really is a range. So each child with autism is in a different place.
Right.
Wow. So that requires some pretty unique patience and like, well, definitely a team. Like if you were doing it
Yeah.
alone, that might be pretty challenging.
I think you have to have flexibility. I think if you can be flexible and not be so rigid, like we still follow the same curriculum that they do in first through fourth grade here at Bethel. We're doing the same curriculum. So
Yeah.
we're doing a lesson, we're doing a memory verse, we're doing declarations, we do worship time, we do all those same things. It's not babysitting. We just do it in a way that's sensitive to having them come along.
Yeah.
I had a young man, one of my very first students I worked with years ago that had autism. I was in a small class and there were like only 7 or 8 kids in the class. And it was 3rd through 6th grade class. And this kid came in, and when he would get stressed, he liked to draw a map of Israel. So we're doing our lesson, and all of a sudden this kid's at the board drawing, and I'm like, all right, so I can focus on that and say, you need to sit down like everyone else, or you need to stop that, or, kids aren't allowed to draw on the board. But I just ignored him, finished the lesson with the rest of the kids who are now saying, what is that? What is Benny doing up at the board? And I turned around, it's this map of Israel. I'm like, all right. Then I just let him tell us about what's there and what the Bible story that we did, where did that happen in that map? And so now the other kids found a place for him to be in their group. And so he had a place to belong. So I think flexibility is probably even more important than patience. I'm not a super patient person, but I am flexible.
I love it. I love the things you're emphasizing, giving people a place,
Yeah.
creating connection, like where people, it sounds like these kids are going to experience being valued, being seen, being known. Yeah. And all towards the end, like there's growth happening in that exchange of love. That's right. Interesting. Like love grows us. This is beautiful. And to me, it also sounds very simple. And I don't mean that in the sense that you're not doing profound things. It's just, there's a simple path. So it sounds like creating capacity for those that are facing this reality, autism. Like there's space. We can make space. Yeah. And churches can make space. Because I would imagine a lot of churches are like, shoot, what do we do? I don't have time for that. And so this is an example of like, it can happen. There's some fruit. There's some real fruit you guys are seeing. It's beautiful.
I think one of the fears that I have heard from people is if we start something, we'll be overwhelmed, and we don't have the capacity for that. We don't have the resources, or who would staff that, and we don't have the skills. And people are like, oh, what if they have a diagnosis and we're not medical professionals? Like, you know what? This is children's ministry. We're not doing occupational therapy. We're doing children's ministry. So, I don't do medicine. I don't do all those things. I do children's ministry. And the reality is, probably, if your church decided to start something for special needs kids, it's probably not going to be larger than 10% of your existing children's ministry population. It really isn't that big a number. So even if you did a specialized classroom and you have 300 kids coming to your children's ministry, you're probably going to see 30 kids or less that you would need to have any kind of support for. Yeah. Half of those are going to they're going to be included with your regular classes because their issues are not, severe enough to pull them out. You might have 15 kids that need to be in a specialized room. Yeah. That just simply doesn't do loud and crazy things.
Yep. That's great. I love that. Like, so even if you're in a large environment, it's not going to be hundreds of kids coming your way. That's got to feel empowering to people. Yeah. And we kind of lost you there. There was, again, some apologies for the internet challenges we're facing here, but I'm just summarizing some of the thoughts that I can discern Kiki shared. It's like, it won't be that much of an influx. Like you're talking about maybe a few dozen, a dozen, if you're starting something even in a larger environment. So that's got to feel empowering to leaders, church leaders.
Mhm.
Any kind of parting thoughts? I mean, I know there's so much we can talk about. We're really scratching the surface here, but this feels super encouraging, very enlightening. And I love the simplicity of your focus. It's like, oh, I feel empowered talking. I'm like, we could do something about that.
Yeah.
Again, thankfully you are doing something about that in our world. So super huge honor your way. But anything else that we haven't like touched on that you were hoping to bring up?
No, I think I just would really encourage people. You start with one. You start with the one that comes to your door, and
Yeah,
make a place for them. And that's what we do for everybody. We welcome people right where they are, and then we see the gospel transform them. I don't know.
I love it.
It
I
doesn't
love
get
it.
better than that, does it?
That's beautiful. That is so beautiful. Thanks for taking time with us, Kiki. It's really inspiring to hear about what you guys are doing, and hoping this conversation encourages others in different communities that
Yeah.
maybe brush up against this need and haven't known what to do. To hopefully this feels empowering to them to see how, oh, okay, it's as simple as that. Again, I know there's a lot of work behind the scenes and a lot of time you've invested, so it's not easy, but it does sound like as simple as loving, as being flexible, and yeah. So good
Yeah.
job. Much respect your way. Thank you for what you're doing. And how would people connect with you if they wanted to maybe knock on your door, ask some more questions? Is there an email? I don't know if there's a social media.
There's breakthrough at bethel.com is
Okay.
an email they can use.
Okay. So breakthrough at bethel.com, that would be going essentially into one of your inboxes, Kiki.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Yeah. Thank you again for taking time with us. And you guys that are joining us in this moment, hopefully this has been inspiring for you, encouraging, enlightening. And again, we will see you next time here. We're gonna take some time, like the next month or so, we'll be having conversations in this space. So look forward to some more good stuff. And Kiki, bless you. Have a great day. Thanks.